Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is John Dillon and we are here to cover all topics regarding Salesforce Apex programming language. Today we're going to look at the concept of test-driven development and what that looks like on the Apex platform. So if you haven't heard of it before, you're probably aware that when we develop things in Salesforce using Apex, that we need to have unit tests to exercise the code that we write, and there's a minimum percentage of coverage that's needed in order to deploy to production. But unit testing is actually a pretty important aspect of software development, regardless of a platform or programming language. And one of the approaches that people take to ensure that they get good quality unit tests and a really good amount of coverage is to do test-driven development. So the idea is you write your tests first and then you make your code pass your tests. So if that sounds a little backwards, it's just a different approach, and let's just jump in and look at an example. So what we're going to do is, let's say this is a string utils class and string tests that we've written in the past. What we're going to do is we're going to assume we've got a new requirement that we have we need a new function in this class, in the strings utils class, to capitalize words. We're going to send in, let's say, a paragraph, and we're going to take every word and capitalize it. So rather than start here and say, oh, this is what I think it's going to, the logic is going to be, we're going to start actually from the test itself. So I'll create a new test. One of the things we do when we're doing test-driven development, we're going to start everything from the test, including calling the method. So the first thing we might want to do is check to see if we pass in a null value, we get a null return. Very, very simple. So and when we save it, of course, we're going to get a compiler error. So this is our first test failure, if you will. The compiler doesn't work because this method doesn't exist yet. So let's go to our main class and create it. We'll take in a string, we'll call that string paragraph, and this won't save unless we return something, so we can return null. So one of the approaches that people do with this is you do the bare minimum to get your test to pass. That way your test is always driving your development. So here we can come back and save this. And let's just run our test. And we can see in the logs the test was run successfully. As we mentioned before, we can look at the test window to see successful running of tests. Sometimes I find it convenient to look at the logs. To me, there are some conveniences here, but we'll look at both throughout this. So back to the test. So passing in null returns null, just like we wanted it to. So what would be the next thing we would want to test with this? If we pass in an empty string, we should get an empty string back. And we run our test, and our assertion failed. Expected blank, we got back null, of course, because all we're doing right now is returning null. So then, now that we've got a test that fails, we actually go in and we make the change to the class. Now we can't just return empty string because we know that'll make our first test fail. So what we should probably do is check to see if it's null, or another thing we can do is if the string passed in is null or if it's blank, we simply want to return what was passed in. There's nothing we can do with it. So, and we go back here, we run our test. Our test passes. So, all right, what would be the next thing we need to, if we pass in, and this is a good thing when you're doing your tests, you want to think about all the different things you might pass into this this function or this method that you're creating. So I'm starting to think, what if we pass in spaces? So if we pass in a bunch of spaces, what do we want back? Do we want back probably the spaces, right? There's no reason for us to truncate it down. There are no words to capitalize. So if we pass in 5 spaces, I expect 5 spaces back. And that works. So the 5 spaces passed into is blank, still returns blank. True for the string is blank. If you're not familiar with this method, the string is blank, you can look that up in the string reference for the string class in the Apex programming language. All right, now let's start getting into some more realistic tests. It's good to test your edge cases, but if I pass in the word, foo, I want foo returned. So again, test-driven development, our tests drive it. Through our tests, we start kind of coming up with the behavior that we want in the function that we're writing. And expected foo, and it returned blank. So right, once we get past this, we're simply returning blank. So this was just a placeholder. So let's, if we wanted to really be pedantic about this, I could return the word foo, make that test pass, and then have another test that counteracts that. But let's start actually getting to some proper implementation here. What we want is to take the first letter and capitalize it. So here we know paragraph has some substance. We know it's not blank, so we can use some substrings to get to the first character. So we're going to grab the first letter of the paragraph and we're going to uppercase it. And then we need to append to that the rest of what's passed in. So substring to 0 to 1 will just grab us the substring from character 0 to character 1, first character. And then substring 1 means 1 being the second character till the end of the string. So let's see, does this make our test pass? And it does. So, and that's the cool thing. Once your test passes, you don't even need to look and see, oh, do I need to go back and do anything. We might do some code cleanup later, but the nice thing is we've got all these tests, and then we can make any changes we want to the class and not worry about changing the behavior. More difficult would be if we have 2 words. Let's foo. Oops, let's try lowercase foo and bar. In that case, we want foo and bar. And when we run the test, so okay, now we're starting to get to the meat of the functionality. We want to see capital F and a capital B, but we only get the capital F. So now what we need to do is realize that the paragraph being sent in is a series of words, so we can collect those in an array, and we'll split it on the space. And now what we want to do is loop through the words. And we're going to basically be using this logic I think all we need to do is modify word. And here, instead of paragraph, we're just going to replace that with word. And then when we return, we could do this a couple ways. We could do, actually, we could build up the paragraph by appending each word as we loop through, or we can, there's a special thing we can do with the string where we can do a join on it. I think the simpler one is to just, let's reuse the paragraph and build it up here. So once we've gotten the words out of paragraph, we can blank it out. And here we can say, and now we're also going to need a space. Now the problem is, actually, let's just run it like that. We'll return paragraph. So we don't want to do too much overthinking when we're coding it up. We just want to do what we need to do to get the test to pass. So let's see if this does it. So, all right, now what has happened is our first test now fails. So what's going on here? So we split the paragraph into words. Oops. This should have been a plus, not an assignment. I think we wiped things out. Surprised that compiled. All right, let's try it again. All right, so here we expected foo, and what was actually returned was foo. Now, if we were to really debug one of the things to notice here is what they were expecting was foo, and what was actually returned was foo with a space on the end. So that's, it might be a little tricky to figure that out, but I could kind of tell that this was coming up. So at the end, right before we return paragraph, we're always adding this space at the end, and that final space is unnecessary. So one way to handle that would be at the very end, just remove the final letter. So. Trying to remember if I need a -1 here or not. Let's just run our test and see. So that worked. All right, we can keep going with. Let's just do one more test with. We'll do 3 words. And success. So at this point, we're done. And we could, if we can think of other ways we want to exercise this, we can. There might be, maybe there's, maybe we'll have a problem if we stick a space in the front. I'm not going to go into that into the video, but that's the idea of test-driven development. We start with the test and we build our code, and then let me just run it one more time. So the cool thing is we don't have any code that's sitting there untested, because every time we've added code, it was to solve a failing test. So when we come back here, we're still going to be at 100%. And it almost guarantees you 100%, because you can't write code if it's not being exercised by the unit test. And again, as I said before, if I wanted to come back in here and change the way we do this, maybe I don't like doing the paragraph split. Maybe there's another method I want to do, I can do it, run my tests, no, I haven't broken anything. So that's all that we've got for today. If you found this interesting, and if you've been, let's say you're an Apex developer, or you're planning on becoming one, or you're working towards adding that to your skill set, I invite you to take a look at my assessment, my free assessment, to see where you are on your path and on your journey on Apex development. You'll see the link at the bottom of the screen, and it's also in the description of this video. And I will see you next time.